Meine sehr verehrten Damen und Herren, herzlich willkommen zum Podcast zu unserer Veranstaltungsreihe Maritime Trends Fit for 55. Dieser Podcast ist ein Mitschnitt eines Live-Vortrags und ich freue mich, dass Sie dieses Angebot des Deutschen Maritimen Zentrums nutzen. Unsere Aufgabe als Deutsches Maritimes Zentrum ist es, die maritime Branche in Deutschland zu stärken, die Wettbewerbsfähigkeit und die Innovationskraft zu erhöhen. Dazu zählt auch, rechtzeitig Themen anzustoßen, die Meinungsbildung voranzubringen und mitzuhelfen, für die Branche frühzeitig die Weichen zu stellen, dass die anstehenden Herausforderungen gemeistert werden können. Die Reduzierung von Emissionen bis hin zu Nullemissionen ist die große Herausforderung, der wir uns als Gesellschaft in den nächsten Jahren zu stellen haben. Die Europäische Union hat hierzu ein Maßnahmenpaket mit dem Titel Fit for 55 aufgestellt. Dieses wollen wir in unserer Veranstaltungsreihe aus unterschiedlichen Blickwinkeln betrachten. Verwaltung, Wissenschaft und Wirtschaft sollen dabei zu Wort kommen.
Für die Veranstaltung am 16. Februar haben wir Magda Kopczynska, Leiterin der Direktion Wasserwirtschaft der Generaldirektion Verkehr in Brüssel, gewinnen können. Sie wird in ihrem Vortrag How to Handle Fit for 55 Insight from the EU Administration die Bedeutung des Fit for 55-Pakets für die maritime Wirtschaft aus Sicht der Verwaltung darstellen. Frau Kopczynska ist seit Mitte Oktober 2016 Direktorin für Schifffahrt in der Generaldirektion Mobilität und Verkehr der Europäischen Kommission. Sie und ihr Team sind zuständig für die Entwicklung und Überwachung der Umsetzung von Maßnahmen zur Unterstützung von Seeverkehr, Logistik, Häfen und Binnenschifffahrt. Frau Kopczynska kam 2006 zur Europäischen Kommission und hat dort in der Generaldirektion Binnenmarkt und Dienstleistung gearbeitet. Sie war zwischen 2009 und 2011 Referatsleiterin für sauberen Verkehr, Stadtverkehr und intelligente Verkehrssysteme. Im Juli 2011 wurde sie Referatsleiterin für Seeverkehrspolitik und Logistik. Von Mai 2014 bis 15. Oktober 2016 hatte sie die Stelle als Direktorin für nachhaltige und innovative Mobilität in der Generaldirektion Mobilität und Verkehr inne. Frau Kopczynska spricht Deutsch nicht als Muttersprache, sodass dieser Beitrag in englischer Sprache sein wird. Dear Magda, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for inviting me here today. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk to you about Fit for 55 and more importantly, to also address your questions. Those of you who have heard me either here in the German Maritime Forum or in other fora, you will know that I have a tendency to speak too long and I have a tendency to get carried away when I speak. I promise I will try to finish in time to really listen to your questions, but there is quite a lot that I wanted to use the opportunity today to share with you. So before I go into Fit for 55, I have to tell you that I hesitated a bit how to structure the presentation today, because on the one hand we are already 6-7 months since the Commission put on the table the package. And things are happening as we speak, both in the Council and in the European Parliament. But on the other hand, as they are happening in working parties in the Council and as the final reports in the Parliament are not yet always there and the amendments are being discussed, I realized that I actually don't have very much updated slides that I could share with you to present to you the status of discussion. In addition, it's not always easy to share those discussions because obviously what is happening in the Council between member states is subject to confidentiality. So even though we are in the room, of course, it's very difficult to put it on a slide what's happening there. So what I thought I'd do instead, I will use slides that some of you might have seen at some occasions. We try to update them a little bit, and I will use them as the excuse to talk to you not only about why we put the package in the way we put it on the table on the 14th of July, but also what's happening and where the discussions may be going or may not be going from what we see. Obviously, anything that I will be saying when it comes to the current stage of discussion, I'm actually saying on my personal behalf, so this is not the official position of the European Commission when it comes to those. And when I state an official position, I will make it clear. So let me start with the presentation. Obviously, you will know, and I know we talked about it previously, that the question of European Green Deal, of delivering on an ambitious climate agenda, has been something that President von der Leyen put up front as the driving element of her agenda in July 2019, when she was making her first presentation to the European Parliament. Things were, of course, overtaken by the COVID development, by the emergency mechanisms that we had to put in place, but the emergency measures. But as we have often been saying, COVID will go away, climate challenge will not. That what led to the presentation of the European Green Deal, that what led to the presentation of the European Climate Law, and that led also to the presentation of the Fit for 55 package in July. European climate law is very important because this is the one where we proposed the target for 2030 of at least 55% net greenhouse gas emissions reduction. This target was supported and accepted by all EU member states, and as such is the binding target for the EU. That explains the title of the package. Fit for 55 means we need to do things so that we are ready for that challenge. Now, if you look at the full package of Fit for 55 presented in July, you will see that there were 14 proposals, some of them unrelated to maritime transport at all, but quite a few of them important when it comes to shipping. And of course, what we should have at the back of our head is that originally, when Paris Agreement was signed in 2015, maritime transport as a sector was not specifically pointed to for the national commitments to be taken by member states, and the action was sent to the International Maritime Organization. Same concerns aviation. International aviation was also left in the hands of the other UN body, namely ICAO. But what has been accepted within the EU in many political discussions, what was very clear from the European Parliament was that we should, at the European level, look at shipping, look at maritime transport, and see what can be done to speed up the transition of the shipping sector to a greener and cleaner transport mode, because simply waiting for the developments at the IMO may not necessarily fit with the policy objective for the European Union. And one thing that was very quickly, again, accepted and agreed upon is that there are a few things that we should look at when it comes to shipping. We need to look at measures that will push for increased efficiency, less energy used in shipping. We need to look at measures that will push for the use of cleaner energy, alternative fuels, zero-emission fuels in shipping. And we need to look at all the flanking measures that will support those developments. Hence, we coined the term of a basket of measures, which is now used in the EU, but which is also used, and I will talk about it later, which is also used when we discuss international measures at the IMO. So in this plethora of different measures that were part of the Fit for 55, you now have a slide that mentions all the measures that were put forward by the Commission in July last year that touch upon shipping. And I would like to go through all of them relatively quickly, I hope. And then, as I said, talk very briefly about the IMO and then leave time for your questions. So that slide I think I can skip, but you have the presentation, and maybe it's useful that you actually have it at the back of your head as the description of what different measure will do or should do when it comes to shipping. I will start with ETS extension for two reasons. First of all, this is the one that is very well known and has been very much talked about and was announced very early in the mandate of President von der Leyen. But it's also the one that is developing the fastest, or is coming about the fastest when it comes to discussions in the Council and in the Parliament. And basically what ETS does, the European, the emission trading scheme as we know it in the EU, is basically putting a cap on the emissions for all the installations, all the industries that are covered by ETS. This cap goes down each year, and as a result, the number of allowances that are there will be reduced with time, which will lead on the one hand to the increase in price, but on the other hand will force the industries, the sectors under ETS to decarbonize because they will not have any other choice. What it will do by being extended to shipping, it will put the price of carbon in the shipping sector on the same level as it is for the entire European economy. And that's exactly the first point on this slide. What the proposal from the Commission envisaged is that there will be a phase-in period starting from 2023 in terms of how much emissions ships should report. That is to say, how much of those emissions will be under the cap. You will clearly, I'm sure you will see and you will note that ETS kicks in very quickly for maritime transport. When aviation was put in the ETS in, I think, 2013, there has been quite a long period of free allowances in aviation. That's not envisaged for shipping, but I can tell you that the question of the moment when ETS will kick in for shipping is one of those topics that is debated in the Parliament, and is also one of those topics that Council is considering in their discussions, also because in parallel to what we have on the table in the EU when it comes to ETS, we also are starting discussions about a global market-based measure related to carbon pricing at the International Maritime Organization level. Since we were working on Fit for 55 as a package, there were quite a few things which concern ETS and then Fuel EU that we have been developing together. We wanted to make sure that there is as much consistency between those two proposals as possible because they both concern shipping sector. So, for example, the scope when it comes to ships that are covered by both proposals, ships above 5,000 gross tonnage, regardless of the flag they fly. The question of so-called geographical scope, namely which trips, which journeys by those ships will be in the scope of both proposals. Again, the same approach for both, all traffic within the EU, and then 50% of emissions from voyages starting or ending outside the EU. I'm stopping here for a second because I think it's also interesting for you to note that those 2 points, the ships that are covered and the geographical coverage, are clearly points that are raising a lot of political discussions. We are hearing all approaches, both in the Council and in the Parliament, some proposing we limit it drastically, for example, only to intra-EU, others proposing that we go all the way and cover all traffic coming in and out of EU ports with full international journey. The same for the ships. There are some who say we should go all the way to the 400 gross tonnage limit in terms of coverage, but all those things are being discussed. And one of the things we are saying to that when explaining our approach is that we based ourselves on the MRV monitoring, reporting, verification scheme that is already in place since 2018 in terms of picking up those vessels which emit the most, so that we can balance out the effectiveness of the measures with also the ability to enforce and manage the systems that need to be put in place to actually enforce those two measures. One more comment, last bullet point on this slide, I already referred to that. There is a review clause in ETS, but also in Fuel EU, clearly stating that we will be watching what's happening at the IMO level, and once there's more clarity, there we will review what we do with the European legislation. I think I can safely say that if a market-based measure with carbon pricing is agreed at the international level, we will need to look into ETS, whichever form it is agreed upon finally, to make sure that we don't do double payments for ships that are covered, that would be then covered by ETS and by the IMO measure. But it can be done. There can be either complementarity envisaged, or there can be a carve out. I think for that we are very open, and a lot will depend on what type of measure IMO will agree upon and how quickly that measure will be agreed. So now moving to Fuel EU Maritime, that's the one that pushes for cleaner fuels to be used in shipping. We knew when we started working on this proposal that it's quite a challenge, because we are in an environment where there is not single one confirmed technology that will work for the entire sector to bring it to zero emissions. We are seeing different types of technologies developing, being tested for different types of trade, different types of shipping, different type of routes, different types of ships. So we followed here a very strong request from the industry to come up with an approach that is as technologically neutral as possible. And that's why the approach to concentrate on the energy content of the fuel used, or energy content of the fuels on board, without specifying that one or other fuel is a preferred approach. We understand the challenges. It would be much easier to point to specific technology, but I hope, and especially you from representing the industry, the maritime cluster, I hope you will also agree with me that if we were to wait till we have this one best all fixing everything technology, we will probably wait for another 5-10 years. And one of the difficulties we have is that the transition needs time, and preparing the entire ecosystem for low or zero emission fuels will not happen overnight. So it's actually better to find a way where different technologies can coexist than wait for this possible one technology that actually may not even arrive. What was very clear is that it is a complementing measure to ETS, because this one looks at technology and fuels, doesn't look into carbon pricing. This is the one that will reduce the emissions as time goes. It is a long-term measure, putting forward targets all the way to 2050, which means ship owners, ship operators, they know what vessels they should have in operation in 2040, 2045, 2050 to be in line, in compliance with Fuel EU. And that was one of the very important elements that we agreed at the beginning that we have to include in the proposal. And again, we are looking very closely at what's happening at the IMO. I am really happy to see that discussions on a possible fuel standard as the second complementary measure at the IMO are going quite well. There seems to be quite a good support for the approach, which is very close to Fuel EU, which means once this global measure is there at the IMO level, complementarity will be a given. And again, we don't want double regulatory framework. We want one global regulatory framework. But actually what we have done for Fuel EU is a perfect testing ground, perfect analytics that is being used for the IMO measure as well. So I think for this one, I'm really happy with what's happening, at least for now. So as I said, here we focus on the fuel and we focus on the demand side. That's another very important element of this proposal, very much discussed. Not everybody in the shipping sector was immediately on board when we presented it, because what we said is what we can check is in order for alternative fuels to enter the market, we need a demand for those fuels, because otherwise there will always be this wait and see approach and nothing will be happening. Hence, a clear statement and a clear framework in the legislation, ships will have to use such fuels. By that, they will need to insist that such fuels are available. I mentioned the gradually more stringent targets that you have on your screen. And what is also very important, we do not focus only on CO2. We also include methane and NOx, and we look at the full well-to-wake life cycle when it comes to fuels that will be considered. All that leads to a rather complicated mathematics, if I may say so, underlying the proposal or as attached to the proposal, but it actually looks more complicated than it is, because there are several, it's just a question of doing the numbers once, and then you can count for any fuels you want, or for any type of mix of technology on board, because what this proposal does, it also takes account, I think it can be on one of the next slides, it also takes account of all the other sources of energy that are on board of vessels. If there is wind support, if there are electric auxiliary engines, if there are fuel cells, all that will be accounted in the annual reporting that is envisaged by the proposal. As I said, as much similarities with ETS, hence the geographical scope and the scope when it comes to vessels. And what is very, very important, we've also envisaged a system which we called here a pooling mechanism, to make sure that for those companies that will invest in vessels that will go even beyond the target for any given 5 years, they will be able to use that over compliance to balance other ships that they are operating, which may be a bit under compliance over those 5 years. Reporting will be on an annual basis. And again, what we want with this proposal is as much flexibility as is possible for the sector, while at the same time, the sector is being pushed to decarbonize and lower the emissions. And one, again, additional element that deserves special mention, we also require that vessels which are at berth emit zero. Not immediately. There is a phase-in approach. There is also a phase-in approach that we start with container vessels and passenger ships, because these are the ones which are most polluting when in ports. And the zero emission at berth can be fulfilled by connection to onshore power supply, but can also be fulfilled by using whatever zero emission energy generation vessels have on board, which is important because we know that, for example, cruise vessels are working in that direction, and some of them are installing additional technologies or additional energy generators that are zero emission on board of those vessels. It's an important element because ports are normally located close to where we live. So the question of air quality is an additional factor to consider. But it's also important because it needs to be part of the equation. It's not only what vessels do when they are on the way, but also what they do when they are at berth. Before we now go to the next proposal, a few words on what's happening with Fuel EU. I told you at the beginning that ETS is moving much faster through the Council and the Parliament. When it comes to Fuel EU, Slovenian presidency that held the presidency of the Council in the second half of 2021 discussed with us, and we agreed that while they will do the first initial round of discussions about Fuel EU, they will not necessarily push to reach already a political agreement at the level of ministers, also because last autumn was immensely busy when it comes to the IMO. And we agreed with the Slovenian presidency that between the two we'll put more focus on the IMO, also because we knew that European Parliament will be late. And European Parliament is late when it comes to the aviation fuel proposal, maritime fuel proposal, and alternative fuel infrastructure regulation, because there were long discussions over summer going all the way until October, when the European Parliament couldn't decide which committee should handle those three proposals. Normally it should be Transport Committee, but Environmental Committee was very much pushing to be in the lead because of the strong environmental angle of those proposals, and those discussions were only solved early in October, which of course put a huge delay on the progress of works in the European Parliament. For Fuel EU, Transport Committee will only have a discussion on the report on that proposal around 20th of April. And the vote is only envisaged in July, which shows you how slow but also how complicated the discussions in the European Parliament are going to be. In the meantime, for the Council, French presidency prepared already in December a plan which parts of the proposals they want to take when, and the discussions are very, very intensive. For example, 2 meetings of the working group envisaged this week. With the French presidency planning, there should be an agreement at the ministers' level during Transport Council on the 2nd of June. If that happens on the Council side, then we will wait for the Parliament, not only to vote in the committee, but also to vote in the plenary in September. Once we have those 2 elements, the next stage of discussions will start, the so-called trilogue, when we have the Parliament, the Council and the Commission as a facilitator in the room to try to bridge any gaps that there are between the 2 institutions. Again, it's a bit difficult for me, not only because I shouldn't, but also because I actually don't know which direction the Parliament will go. In the Parliament, we have, of course, very strong views depending on the political group the members of the Parliament come from. Some of them going in much more ambitious directions, some of them going in slightly less ambitious direction. A bit similar in the Council, where there are countries that call for higher targets, going all the way to 100% emission reduction in 2050. Others who are saying less so. So again, at this moment, I will not predict the final outcome, but seeing the divergent views, it is not impossible that what the Commission put on the table, of course, with some tweaks and changes and adjustments, can end up being pretty much the middle ground that in the end everybody will be happy with. Because what I can say is that there are questions, there are requests for clarification, but there is no major opposition against this approach for alternative fuels. Now, to add the third element in the puzzle, alternative fuel infrastructure regulation, building on an alternative fuel infrastructure directive agreed in 2014, looking at imposing requirements for alternative fuels infrastructure, as the name suggests, across all transport modes. Here we focus, of course, on the maritime ports, because that's what we are talking about today. And there are a list of requirements in the regulation for the onshore power supply, also specifying when and how and which vessels will have to connect, which not. Again, what's important, the wording in AFIR, Alternative Fuel Infrastructure Regulation, was drafted together with the wording drafted in Fuel EU. So we have complete match between the 2 proposals. Again, it was important that we are consistent and we don't create divergent ideas. What we see with AFIR, discussions really progressed well under the Slovenian presidency, but then the Council decided they want to wait for the rest of the package, including Fuel EU, before agreeing finally at the ministers' level. So we'll probably also see agreement on the 2nd of June in the same Transport Council meeting. When it comes to Parliament, a bit similar. Parliament, that proposal was part of the package where committees quarreled who will discuss what. So the works are only starting. Again, different views when it comes to which ports should be covered by the obligation of installing OPS. And we'll need to see how it goes. I think no major issues in terms of which ships should be obliged, but there is quite a lot of discussion whether what is proposed in AFIR, that it's trans-European transport network ports only, how it can match our requirement in Fuel EU that for some vessels it should be all ports. That vessels should go zero emission when they are in those ports. But on AFIR, it's of course the complexity of the proposal is such that it goes beyond maritime. So when you have discussions in the Parliament, they also look at land transport, at charging stations. You know what needs to happen when it comes to aviation and so on and so forth. But I do hope that the envisaged timing will also allow for trilogues for that proposal to start in autumn at the latest as well. I think two more proposals that I wanted to mention shortly. Renewable Energies Directive, revision of which was proposed as part of the Fit for 55 package. Why it is important for us is that the sustainability criteria, sustainability requirements that will be in the game for Fuel EU are determined, described, prescribed by RED revision. And of course, there are the question of how we define sustainable fuels, the question of sub-target, for example, for renewable fuels of non-biological origin, all that is described in RED. Again, for that reason, the fact that the proposals were drafted at the same time and we have been in touch with colleagues in DG Energy definitely helped. RED is a much bigger proposal than just fuels because RED looks at the entire renewable energy landscape. So the discussion on RED will certainly be complicated. What we need to make sure is that nothing happens as part of RED that will make it complicated for the waterborne, for the maritime part to be implemented. And one very, very important element that is that we were very keen on framing also properly and implementing later when it comes to RED is the question of certification. Because what is needed for Fuel EU is that ships will be able to demonstrate that the fuels that they are bunkering also outside will have the CO2 content as they tell us they do. So for that reason, we will refer back to the certification that is put in place for RED. As we've been explaining on many occasions, it's already in place. It has worked also outside the EU. We have means of tracing those fuels. And it will be further developed as the RED 2 is finalized and it continues to be implemented. And I think I stop here at RED. There's one more piece of legislation, which is the Energy Taxation Directive, which I'm not talking here a lot at this moment. But what I can tell you is that discussions on the Energy Taxation Directive go relatively slowly in the Council. Only the first political debate is planned for June, and we have no timeline when and how it will be agreed. So the Energy Taxation Directive, which is the one that should complement, for example, ETS for consistency, that will take much more time. I'm just quickly thinking whether there's anything I wanted to say. I did promise you a reference to IMO, but in a way I did it when we spoke. What is important for us, but I think for everybody dealing with shipping in the EU, when it comes to the IMO, is that Fit for 55 did help to speed up considerations at the IMO level. The very fact that we were saying very transparently what we are planning to put on the table and when was the additional motivation factor, if I may say so, to start looking at the market-based measure faster. And then once Fuel EU was on the table, also this concept of coming up with a fuel standard at a global level definitely picked up. Next MEPC meeting at the IMO, starting on the 6th of June, which hopefully will already be an in-person meeting, should allow us to really progress in terms of what the IMO will be doing, what will be the exact measures, how they will work. It will take a few years to agree on those, of course, at the IMO level. It always does, but there is definitely a change in terms of the IMO commitment to decarbonize shipping. I stop here because, I still am within time, and I hope that we will be able to use the remaining 20 minutes for me to answer your questions. Thank you so much.
Vielen Dank, Magda Kopczynska, für die Vorstellung. Es hat mir gezeigt, wie viele unterschiedliche Ideen schon auf den Weg gebracht worden sind, aber auch was noch vor uns liegt und welche große Herausforderung sich bis 2030 für die maritime Branche und in der Zeit danach stellt, um zu einer Neutralität bei Treibhausgasen zu kommen. Das Programm Fit for 55 der Europäischen Union ist hierfür eine gute Orientierung für alle Beteiligten. Vielen Dank noch einmal unserer Referentin und Ihnen allen fürs Zuhören.